Hello, everyone. This is going to be 13.6 Culture During the Depression, and we're going to start with a quote from a movie called My Man Godfrey, one of my favorite movies of the 1930s. It basically spends a lot of its time talking about how the rich are. Uh, Need to be taken down a peg and the poor need to be brought up one. This man Godfrey is formerly wealthy, became a homeless man, and now is a butler for a wealthy family. And he said, the only difference between a derelict and a man is a job. Our objectives, we're going to trace the growth of radio and movies in the 30s and how both mediums reflected the characteristics of the times. We're going to explain the relationship between the New Deal and the arts, and we're going to describe the major themes of literature in the Depression era. So let's look at culture as escape during this time. In the 1930s, movies and radio had gotten very popular. Radio in the homes and movies out there in the movie theaters. About two out of every three families went to go see a movie. It was relatively cheap, easy, and comfortable entertainment. Movies were a really good way to escape just the badness of life. They were escapism in a big way. And we see this in a lot of the movies that were being made during this time. We're seeing a lot of technical advancements. First of all, sound in the 1920s moving into color in the 1930s. People went to go see movies like The Wizard of Oz. They went to go see the first full-length animated Disney feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This one won a lot of Oscars for that. We also see that horror movies became very popular. Dracula and Frankenstein and a lot of the horror movie baddies like that. Maybe because it was easier to face evil monsters than Depression-era woes. So here's Judy Garland in beautiful Technicolor with The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Here is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. And here is Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster, the monster, in Frankenstein 1931. People are also going to go to movies to root for people who they see as sort of like them. And for a while, that meant that they were going to root for gangsters. They saw gangsters as kind of the Robin Hoods of the Prohibition era and also the Great Depression. We also see that directors like Frank Capra are trying to sort of go more for the everyday American hero, the regular guy who also just does what he can in order to help America be better. We see this in movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where a young man is made a senator and he fights corruption in Washington, D.C. Great movie. So here is Frank Capra. He once said, no saint, no pope, no general, no sultan has ever had the power a filmmaker has. The power to talk to millions of people for 2 hours in the dark. And here is a shot of Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which holds the curious honor of being banned both in a communist country and in a fascist country at the same time. So apparently, that's when you know you're doing something right, is when both sides are attacking you as something to be ignored or to be frightened of. So, we also see a lot of radio shows during this time, like The Shadow and The Lone Ranger. They became very popular. Most families either had a radio or could listen to somebody else's radio. The Shadow helped to launch the career of Orson Welles, who became a very famous filmmaker, and he was the one who convinced the American populace that we were under attack from Martians. He did this in a radio show called War of the Worlds, where he made it sound so real, and people tuned in late and didn't hear the part where he said, hey, this is all just a big old trick. So people thought that, yeah, America was legit under attack from people from outer space. And of course, we also already talked about Roosevelt using the radio for his fireside chats, trying to talk to the American people in a way where it seems like he's not the president, he's their buddy who came over to kind of talk to him for a little while. So here's Orson Welles. He was a radio show producer at first and a theater producer. He is famous for having this very deep voice and resonant voice. The Shadow was this mysterious crime fighter, almost like the first Batman, and he was famous for saying, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows." And he once said, "The essential is to excite the spectators. If that means playing Hamlet on a flying trapeze or in an aquarium, you do it." Now, radio also introduced a lot of listeners to new kinds of music that were coming in, new musicians. Again, the power of mass culture during this time. We also see African Americans are becoming popular. One is a guy who had the nickname Leadbelly. I believe his name was something Leadbetter. I forget what his real name is. But he was a musician who was discovered in prison and became an international superstar. We also see songs of this time taking on tough issues. There's Fats Waller's song Black and Blue, which is about the difficulties of being African American at this time. And also famously, Billie Holiday's anti-lynching song Strange Fruit is a great example of this. So here is, his first name was Huddle William Ledbetter, aka Leadbelly. And he said, "I always sing too long and too loud." I'm right there with you, man. So we see also during this time increased funding for the arts. So part of the New Deal was increased funding for arts projects, including the Federal Arts Project, which put artists and painters and sculptors and playwrights and everybody back to work. This included people who painted huge murals. Many are still around today, basically these giant paintings on the walls of federal buildings. It also employed photographers like Dorothea Lange, famous for her photography of people during the Depression. So here is a mural in the main branch of the St. Louis Post Office, a Federal Arts Project mural that was done during this time period. Here's Dorothea Lange, who said, "The camera is an instrument that teaches people how to see without a camera." And here is probably her most famous photo. It's called Migrant Mother. This woman is named Florence Owens Thompson, and here we see her holding her 3 children. If you want to see this at Nearinks Hall, you can go behind the EAC by the dark room, and we have a mural of it painted on the wall right there. Now, the Federal Arts Project was, for some people, popular and for some people very controversial because basically they were employing people who were writing plays that were pro-socialism and pro-communism. And so this seemed sort of like biting the hand that feeds you a little bit. Supporters basically said, look, this is a place where all voices can be heard. But one way or another, the Federal Arts Project was gone by World War II. We had less money to spend on art and more money to spend on war by the time World War II came around. So here is the cast of a famous play called The Cradle Will Rock in 1937. It became famous partially because they weren't allowed to put it on the stage. They were banned from their first stage. Then they walked down to a new stage, were not allowed to go on stage to perform it, so they performed it from the audience. Now, the Depression in literature. Many writers of the time, especially John Steinbeck, distrusted and blamed politicians for getting us into the Depression, and so their works focus on sort of the people, the regular people, as the heroes of the Great Depression. This includes the main characters of Mice and Men, and also The Grapes of Wrath, his famous epic of the Great Depression. We also have playwrights like Lillian Hellman, who used her plays to tackle very controversial issues during this time. She got a lot of play from the Federal Arts Project as well. One of her most famous plays was a play called The Children's Hour, which was about a teacher being outed by a student and the impact that that had on the small town that they lived in. So here's John Steinbeck, who said, "What good is the warmth of summer without the cold of winter to give it sweetness?" And Lillian Hellman, who said, "I cannot and will not cut my conscience to fit this year's fashions." One of the most popular forms of literature during this time, though, was comic books. This was the first time we see the growth of comic books, and they had not yet taken on the serious term of graphic novels yet. They were comic books. They were cheap, they were colorful, and again, they were escapist. You get to be a superhero for 30 pages. The most popular and famous of this time was Superman, who appeared for the first time in 1938. And a lot of people liked him because he seemed like a normal guy. You know, when Batman finally comes around a few years later, he's a super rich guy. But Clark Kent is a regular guy with, regular problems, but also he has these incredible superheroic powers. This idea of a normal guy who is secretly a superhero, very popular amongst people who saw themselves as the little guy during this time. And so here is Action Comics number one, the first appearance of Superman, June 1938. Only cost 10 cents back then.